Sometimes it's hard to really imagine how people used to live back before your grandparents' time. When you see pictures from long ago, are you able to imagine how things smelled or how hot the day was? Looking at a picture, it's hard to get a sense of a living, breathing person. Today, let's try to peel back some layers and take ourselves to those earlier times, bringing our imaginations along as a way to learn more about the land under our feet. With the help of our tribal educators, we're going to compare the way things are now with the way things were long before we were born. We'll cover the topics of water, food, shelter, staying warm, transportation, money, and communication. Then we'll listen to a story and practice using our imaginations. But first, let's introduce you to our tribal elders and educators who will help us understand this story. We have two from the Chinook tribe, George Lagergren and Tony Johnson. From the Wasco tribe, we have Pat Courtney Gold. And representing the Walla Walla, we have Cecilia Bearchum. We have three from the Blackfeet tribe, Curly Bear Wagner, Calvin Weatherwax, and Narcissus Blood. And from the Kalispel tribe, we have Alice Ignis and Francis Kaluuya. Two from the Coeur d'Alene tribe, Cliff Saijon and Felix Aripa. Three from Nez Perce, Otis Halfmoon, Horace Axtell, and Lee Bergeau. From the Kootenai tribe, Vernon Finley. From the Salish, we have Louis Adams. From Crow, Joe Medicine Crow. And from Chippewa Cree, Patrick Chief Stick. We have two from the Mandan tribe, Malcolm Wolf and Tilly Walker. From Lakota, we have Alex White Plume. We also have Carolyn Russell and Clover Smith Anaquad, two young women who help us understand how these traditions continue. How did people used to get water? Have you ever drawn water from a well? How would you get water if you didn't have a well? Could you drink just anywhere from a creek? Would it be the same to drink out of the Missouri River? Have you ever had fresh spring water from the source, not a plastic bottle?
The water, what we call the Saitapi spirit, the water is extremely powerful. Everything is living, everything is alive. You look up at the sun, you look at the sky, the moon, the stars, the clouds, the mountains, the trees, the rocks, the hills, the grass, the water, everything is living, and they're all related, and we're part of that relationship. Without those things, we can't survive as a people. Our people fully understood that.
All of the living things, water, especially water. Water, our elders tell us, is the blood life of Mother Earth. And anytime we do a ceremony, you know, the first thing that we do when we eat our meal is to drink water. to cleanse ourselves. And we get done eating and we sing our last song, and which is a prayer, and we drink water again. Everything needs water, so water is very sacred to us.
Where does our food come from? Do you know what the native foods of this place are? What would you have to think about to make sure you could feed your family in the days before grocery stores and domesticated animals and garden plots?
That's meest met quite lim. Said a long time ago, we didn't know what a store was. We didn't know what money was. So that, but we had all of this. What the Almighty give us, that's what we have. That I guess that they consider that their supermarket.
The major staples being buffalo, the deer and the elk, a lot of elk, and the fish. The fish, the trout, the whitefish.
When I was growing up, when I was about 10, we used to spend half of the year around Priest Lake. They have several families go and camp there because they can hunt, nobody bother them. They get their deer, the ladies dry meat, tan hides. They also trap whitefish in the creeks and they dry them, put them in bags and save them. They bring it home. I think when the first snow, then they move back.
And that's why they migrated quite a lot, through the years and months, that went by. They knew when the fish runs were coming, and they knew when they should be here and where they should be there, But all year around, there was oysters. Oysters and clams were available all year round, any time. Just according to the tide, so they had to go by there.
When we have ceremonies, the first thing we do is we drink water, but the first food that's set on the table is the salmon. And that's followed by the meat, the deer meat, the elk meat, our traditional foods. And then comes the roots, and the way that the foods are placed on the table for me is very simple, because it's simply how, in the sequence of when they're harvested, which root is ready first. That's the one that's set in front. And then we just go on down the line, and those that are harvested at the end of the year, just before fall, those are the ones that are last on the table.
After their feast, they'd go out and gather food all through this country, different places, and then come back in the fall and prepare for the winter. And that's when the time was when they got their spirits together and powers together and had games and made handcraft and all that all winter long. So, and then the summer they get just like getting prepared for the next time around, next summer. So that's what we call our way of life, and just automatically know what to do every year.
When it's getting cold up here, we go down to the big rivers, Yellowstone, Missouri, and there the grass is always high, and animals are all down there, so it's good. And our women go up these creeks and the ravines there and pick berries, choke cherries, June berries, and of course they dig wild carrots, wild turnips, and then of course there was always game, there buffalo, deer, and even birds. There are a lot of game birds here we call prairie chickens, and they're out in the prairie. And on the foothills we have what we call sage hens. They're larger birds. And up in the mountains we have what we call blue grouse. They have white meat. So they have all kinds of birds to eat, and of course, there's fish, trout all over. All these mountain streams, big rivers, trout. But the crows rather eat buffalo than sit and fish, you know. But they occasionally they'll get some and eat.
The Mandan taught the Hidatsa how to garden and shared with them the seeds that they had. And so these two tribes were both permanent villagers and planted large gardens. When I think about the kinds of gardens they planted, when they say 5 acres and developing those acres with a stick, with a digging stick, I can't imagine that being done. You know, clearing the land and then digging and having prosperous gardens, very good gardens, especially the corn, which has really sustained us through centuries of time. It's sacred food that isn't taken lightly. It's just a part of us, just like your neighbors or your friends or your own relatives.
In June, we would go out and get the berries, June berries, choke cherries. We would go and get the currants, and my grandma had this way that her grandma taught her. Instead of breaking down the limbs of, like some people do it, they would break down the branches of the choke cherry trees and the berry trees. She would have a big stick, and she would lay a tarp underneath the bush, and then she would hit the bush with the stick to have the berries fall off, so that way the trees would still be there for next year, so the berries could come back. And she would laugh because it's called gabe. When you hit, she would say, "Wana gabe, wana." She would say that we would go. Right now, let's go hit the berries off the trees.
How would you store your food?
They moved towards the mountains when it was time for either digging or for hunting. And when they moved, they always dug into the ground and lined it with tree mats and put all their belongings into those storage areas. And then they covered them up and marked them so they knew where they were, because they couldn't leave it in storage someplace in town or anything like that. There was no such place. So when they went to the mountains to gather roots or whatever, then they would bring it back to where they had their things stored, and then that's where they would winter. You always hear about pemmican. Well, they had the same thing with salmon. They took all the moisture out of it and they stored it, and that's what they used for the winter. When I was growing up, we still stored things in cellars. We still dried things because there was no such thing as cold storage. And canning, salting, and but everybody had a cellar.
Mandan people and Hidatsa people had caches under their homes, under the earth lodges, and they kept corn and squash and sunflowers and beans, all the varieties.
Do a lot of drying meat and fish and hang them up in the tree where the bucks wanted to get into it.
What about shelter? What do people used to do to stay dry and warm in winter and out of the sun in summer?
We made our teepees from the hide of the buffalo. We also had cedar lodges, cedar bark lodges in the winter, lawn houses like lawn teepees with cedar bark. These places were used as a communal building.
Some of the original lodgings that they made, the Kootenays made, were using tulle mats. And tulle, when it was woven and the mats were used, if it was on A rainy day, the tool would kind of swell and it would close off and it would become waterproof. So it would be nice and cool in the summertime when it was dry and hot, but it could be warm and waterproof after the tool became wet.
They were not singular, they were layered. Any kind of material, if you layer it, eventually it becomes insulated. If you look at Thule real good, the inside is like a sponge. And when the water would get on that, and it would absorb it, then it would expand, it would close itself. But there was always a place for the smoke to go out. And there was fire inside, and there were several families that stayed in these Thule mat lodges.
Their camps were always on the north side. All the winter winds and storms come out of the southeast and southwest. And so that was the protected side of the hill. And in the summer months, the northwest winds would come. And that come then, and it cooled them off, then kept it cool where they lived on the north side of those hills.
The Lakota used to camp in the shape of the buffalo's horns. It's shaped like a horseshoe, I guess, or the horns of the buffalo. And it's always facing east, those horns. So they would camp this way. And when somebody wanted to come into camp, they had to come to the center and announce themselves. And if they were accepted, then they could come in.
During Blackfeet country, they traveled during the day, and when they got into Crow country, they travel at night, and they build these war lodges. A war lodge would consist of trees, maybe dead trees that piled up together, and it's camouflage, very unique, and where there's no rain will come in on you. That's how tightly they're placed together, and this is their resting place. They'd rest during the day, and they may cook in there, build small fires, and cook meat up there, and prepare them, and then go on at night.
We moved throughout our area. You know, I get a kick out of when they said that we were nomads. But we were in a very well-defined area, depending on the season, moving into higher ground as different roots and berries ripened, and followed the buffalo as they migrated, but in a very defined traditional area. And you had the different clans moving, and where there was good camping grounds where you get out of the wind and cold areas.
What do you have to think about to take care of yourself outdoors? How did people stay warm? How did they plan for the weather? Did they know when storms were coming?
They wore cedar because cedar, when you pound red cedar bark, it becomes very soft. And they would weave that into a cape and a skirt for the women. When you pound the cedar bark, you're actually putting air pockets into the cedar, so that not only is it waterproof, but the air pockets insulate, so it's also warm. And that was a perfect outfit to wear in a wet climate.
We used to have people that could read the weather. Now they read the weather, they'll turn on the weather station right there. But they had that gift by seeing the plants, how they grew, the animals, how soon they got their winter fur.
My grandmother, she still has a lot of that traditional knowledge of what animals were like back then, to be able to look at an animal and say, oh, okay, this is the type of season that we're going to have. And I remember she would talk about like little things such as ants. She'd be watching and she'd show me if their houses were built upwards, it's going to be a wet summer. As opposed to a little bit lower, it's going to be dry, because they build their houses up because the water won't go into their homes. And in the wintertime, she would look at, we had a muskrat that lived in a lake near our house, and if he had his house on the inside of the lake, it's going to be a hard winter. And if it's on the outside of the lake, near the edge of the shore, it would be not so harsh of a winter. And just stuff like, I think she would call it sun dogs. They would be, if there's two of them on each side of the sun, it's change of weather as well. And there would be even a ring around the sun or the moon at nighttime, and that would mean it would be colder weather. My grandmother would make comments with little kids running around in the house, oh, it's going to it's going to be change of weather, the wind's going to blow or something. And she'd make that comment because even with the horses running, it's change of weather. So she'd make that connection with children and animals. She was so in tune with what her mother had taught her. And so I would pay attention a lot of the times because it was so interesting to know what she knew.
What kinds of fuel did people use?
I had my grandma gather wood. She'd put her ropes there and pile all the wood. Then to throw it on her backpack, stack it. Would have a big stack of wood, dry wood. Then when they're going to dry meat, they have wood right there. They never let their fire go down.
Out on the prairie where wood was scarce, do you know what people used for fuel? I'll give you a hint. Some people call these chips, and others call them pies. The buffalo left them all over the prairie. How would you get from one place to another? What did people do before cars?
The horses was something that came up from Spain, from the Camino Real, it was from Mexico, worked its way up to all the tribes.
When we got horses, it opened up for us to go. That's when they can go buffalo hunting. They can go all different places, go visit their neighboring tribes, you know. So that was accommodating.
And before coming to the horse, we used dogs as means of transportation. The dogs that we used was a wolf-like dog, and what we do, we put a harness over there in the lodge poles in the back, and we carried our belongings that way. An average family of 4 would have about 16 dogs to move their belongings, and a good day's journey would be about 5 miles, and so that's how we traveled in those days.
The Chinook people were canoe people. You know, wherever they went in a canoe or they walked. There was no roads, there were only trails on the land, and that's the only way of travel that really they knew.
The routes that the Pend Oreille, the Kalispel people took were mainly the river system with canoes, because we didn't really have any horses and such at the time.
The waterways were the highways of the Alkmasmaknik. And if you look throughout the plateau area, the Kootenai Territory, there's waterways, small and large waterways everywhere. And the way that Kootenai canoe is designed, it can travel on smaller creeks to larger rivers. The other way, if you're going to go directly east into the mountains or across the mountains into the plains after the buffalo, prior to the horse was walking. Another important part of it through the wintertime was the snowshoes that were made also out of a certain willow, a type of shoe that would stay on top of the snow as opposed to sinking in.
How do people pay for what they needed?
Trade, sharing. That was how it was way back then. I mean, this whole country that we called the Northern Plains, it was very trade routes everywhere, going to and fro, every which way.
There's the old trail that goes through here, as was the people that went to or the plains area to trade our kind of food with their kind of food. So all the Indian foods aren't all the same, and they used this special trail, what they call Kasai Nayak, going to gather food.
Salmon were very important, not only as a food crop, but we traded salmon, and unlike a lot of tribes, our food came to us. We didn't have to go out and hunt for our food. And in this climate with the strong east winds, we could preserve our food So we caught more salmon than we could consume, and we would preserve it, and this is what we would trade.
Our main money was kind of a fathom of Alicochick, the Haiqua or Dentalium shells, and it was either Alicochicks, the big ones, and then this the little Alicochick. That's a set money, was a fathom of, strung big Dentalium shells or strung little Dentalium shells.
The Nez were known for their horses, not only for the Appaloosa, which we were being credited for all these years, but also other horses as well. It is a mode of wealth, horses.
The buffalo would be the same thing as money today, because we focused, our life went around the buffalo. We focused everything on the buffalo. That was our food, our shelter, our clothing, our toys. Everything we needed came from the buffalo. So our whole system was focused around the buffalo. So the buffalo was considered very sacred to our people.
The buffalo, they can use it for blankets. They can tan their buffalo hides, use it for moccasins, whatever. And even the bones, the shoulder blade, buffalo shoulder blade, they dry that. After it's really dry, then they get rock. They scrape the ends. They use that shoulder blade to skin other animals.
Our people say time is not money. Time is always with us. And here and the hereafter, time is always with us. And there's no dollars involved whatsoever. So that's how we see, we visualize. That is why our people really didn't have any value about anything other than it's sacred.
The Lakotas were givers. I know families who gave away everything, including their home at one time. And I was so impressed with that. I went home and I just gathered up more expensive gifts than they gave me, and I went back and I returned it to them and ended up with a better home and nicer things. And so Lakotas, it don't hurt to give everything away, because when you die, you're not taking anything with you. Those are just material possessions. And what's more important is the spirit that exists within you. That is what has to be maintained.
And the ones that are not able to go anywhere, they know they divide their food. Everyone gets something. They share their food with each other to help one another survive.
Have people always had telephones? If you couldn't call someone far away, how would you leave them a message? If your group got delayed on the way to the summer gathering, how would you communicate with the people waiting for you? How did Native people pass down history, stories, and legends, and keep track of events? Did they have calendars? Because each group is unique, different groups had different ways to record important things. Cecilia Bearchum tells us about time balls, a way to keep track of important events in an individual's life.
It was like a diary that they kept, and it was like a string made out of regular string or buckskin. Knots were put on, or beads were put on, whatever the person had, they put on. And just that individual knew exactly what was on there and what happened at that time. It was an individual way of keeping a diary or a notebook, whatever, like you have right there. And she could pull that back and find something, and this is what happened at this time. and then go back further or to recall something by that string. But it was an individual diary.
How did Native people pass down information about noteworthy events for the community? Some tribes, like the Lakota and the Blackfeet, kept a calendar called a winter count. One person would keep track of the years, counted as winters, by painting a picture to represent an important event. A Lakota man named Lone Dog kept this winter count, noting one important event for each year as a symbol to remind people of their history.
We didn't write things, but we drew things. We drew figures, so on. It's etched in stone, maybe on wood, maybe on a piece of buckskin, buffalo robe as such.
How did Native people pass down stories and legends from one generation to the next? Without a written language, people told stories aloud, usually in the wintertime.
My uncle, he was a storyteller. Wherever they hear him, everybody comes in and sit around and tell stories.
When you own something and it becomes yours, an experience, and the kind of storytelling that we heard was exactly that. They were such good storytellers that you experienced the story because of the language.
My grandmother, I learned to understand our language from her, and a lot of our protocols she taught me, and she shared a lot of stories with me, and a lot of those stories I take to heart with me. And even when she would tell a story, hearing it in Blackfoot, it's like you're reliving the whole thing, like you're right there. She was such a gifted storyteller that you could actually see it happening. And the words that she would use in Blackfoot, they're so descriptive. I remember one time it was raining outside and thundering, and I went, and she was laying on her bed, so I laid down with her and I was telling her, tell me one of your stories. And that was the best story that she had told me. She told me one, and it took her 3 hours to tell me. And by the end of the story, I had goosebumps. Like, it was just, I was so freaked out. But it was one of the stories about a character called Naxke.
All kinds of stories. That's what I told my granddaughter. I wish they had invented a tape recorder and video cameras then. Boy, we'd have some nice pictures.
And we don't tell coyote stories till the trees pop from the cold. That would be sometime in January. My grandmother had a house down here, my dad's mother, a log house. It was in December. I went down there and I told her, I told her, tell me a coyote story. She said, she said, no, all the animals that hibernate haven't gone in yet. So you got to wait till everything goes into hibernation before and you wait for the trees that are water soaked to pop. And then the coyote stories come out. That's because at that time till spring, the people wanted to protect the animals that were big, that were going to have little ones, the elk, the deer and stuff. So you left everything alone. And you made sure you had enough wood and stuff to settle in for the winter. That's when the stories come out.
Is it different to just listen to a story told to you by your parent or grandparent than to watch a story, like The Lion King in a movie? Let your imagination take you to that question. How is it different to just be listening? You'll get a chance to listen to a story, an old story, told to you by Elaine Grinnell from the Clallam tribe on the coast of Washington. If you listen carefully, you'll find that the story teaches a lesson. Imagine that you're sitting in a lodge, surrounded by your friends and family. The fire is growing dim as the story begins. As you listen, watch the pictures that form in your mind.
This drum right here represents the last potlatch. And you could see that many things were going on here. But the basis of this painting started when down here, you see, in the evening time, the chief would always go out in the evening time and look out over the water and look to the west to see what kind of day it was going to be. Make up the kind of like the itinerary for the next day. Are we going to go fishing? Are we going to go hunting? Or are we not going to go out there at all? Is there going to be a storm coming? So he'd go out there, and then he'd look down the beach, and then he'd see many bonfires, and then he'd see those that when every person had a bonfire, and that's where they gathered. They'd go down on the beach, and the whole family would sit around, and they would talk. Okay. And so anyway, when he was looking out this one day, or one evening, he looked way out here, and around this spit comes this, a canoe, a cargo canoe, and it was really loaded. And you could tell that it was loaded because it was really down deep into the water. And it appeared that the paddlers, the pullers, were sneaking. I mean, they were trying to maintain a very low profile. And there was a sail up, too. And they were just moving along. And look at that. He could tell that they were using their hunting paddles. They're very, very quiet. So he thought, oh, well, they're going to come in. We're going to have company this evening. So he stood out there and watched them for a while. And that canoe just went right on. Indians don't paddle around in the dark. What's the matter with them? What's going on? Oh, guess they're just trying to make their destination before dark. Sure is odd, though. He didn't say anything more about it. He just came in and went to bed. The next night he went out there, and there goes another one. There goes another canoe. And for sure this is going to come in. Oh, it was low in the water, and they were pulling so hard. And again they went by. So he thought, well, something is going on that we don't know about. So what he did is he came into the house, and he asked his wife, he said, when is the potlatch? And she says, I don't know. I haven't heard of any potlatches. He says, there's going to be a potlatch pretty soon. And she says, yeah, I know, but I haven't heard. Okay. About that time, here comes a runner from down south. He says, when are we going to leave for the potlatch? And the chief says, what potlatch? Yeah, they're having a potlatch down here, what we now know as Sequim Bay, Washington Harbor. And he said, well, he says, that's where all those canoes are going, I'm seeing then. Because then they start to multiply, and there's many going by now. He says, that's where they're going. They're going down to that potlatch. Well, why weren't we asked to go? I don't know. Well, come to find out what had happened. The Clallams were very, very athletic. They had tremendous upper body strength, and because of the work that they did, and they're not very tall people, but the shoulders that they had and the muscular body that they had, it was very conducive to be very athletic, and anything that they did very well. Well, when it came to the games, the Clallams just swept everything. They kept winning continuously and winning. And the people really got mad about that. They just didn't want to play for second place all the time. And so they had made up their minds, we're not going to invite the Clallams this year. We are going to not say anything. We're going to have this potlatch, but we're not going to invite them this year. Because they win everything. We don't like that. Well, Chief finally got all of these people together. He told this one runner, he says, you go down to Etwa. He says, you tell them to bring their strongest men, best weapons, and their fastest canoes. We're going to teach those people a lesson. And he sent another runner way over to Nuskaik. That's Port Gamble. He says, you bring your best weapons, strongest people, fastest canoes. We're going to teach them a lesson. Well, they all met right here. And away they went. When they pulled out away from the beach, it was a sight to behold. They all jumped in the canoes, and when they stuck those extra wide paddles in the water, And they were the only ones that could really use those wide paddles because of the upper body strength. They stuck them down into the water, and it would cause those canoes just about jump out of the water. Whoosh, whoosh. With every stroke, it was just a beautiful thing to see. It was just like porpoises just taking off. Well, it didn't take them very long to get out of distance, out of eyesight. And the people that were way over here now, they were having a potlatch and they were having a good time. Why, they were doing what we call gambling, stick gaming. Oh, they were running contests. They had the longhouse with the big fires in there. The women were all in there. Oh, they were having a good time weaving and telling stories and taking care of the children and cooking. Everyone was having a good time, but they knew they left out some people. And so it was kind of scary too. So every once in a while someone would go down the beach and they'd look to the north, say, anybody coming? No, nobody's coming. Okay, they'd go back and have a good time and eat again. Anybody coming? No. Third time, some little boy went down there and they say, here comes a canoe. Snahool. That's what we call canoe. Here it comes, here it comes. Here comes another one, here comes another one. So everybody gathered down along the beach and they said, who is it? Who is it? Here comes those canoes. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Ooh, it was coming fast too. They couldn't tell who it was. Maybe it's a latecomer. Yeah, it might be from another tribe. It's a latecomer. It's from another tribe. Uh-oh. The sun hit the paddles just at the right time. And when the thickness, the width of the paddles came up, the sun hit that and it glistened. And they could tell that it was the wide paddles that indicated the Klallams. Oh, everybody got so afraid. They ran as fast as they could. The Klallams came up on the beach. They didn't even get out of their canoe. They just run their canoe up on the beach. And they just sat there and the whole earth started to tremble. Perhaps not the whole earth, but where they were, it was trembling. And then all at once it just opened up like this, and that longhouse went down, and all those people went down that great big gaping hole. And then again it started trembling and it closed. The Klallams were so shocked. They weren't happy all this happened because a lot of their friends were there too. And they just looked, they were just so shocked. There was a man up on top of the hill, in fact a young man. He had gone up there for some reason. And then he was watching from the top of this mountain. He was watching down, and he saw the shaking. He saw the Klallams come in, and they didn't even get out of their canoe. And then all at once the shaking began, and it closed up that hole, and everything was gone, and the man just stood there and he couldn't believe what was happening. And the Klallams looked up, they saw him, and he just took off running. Klallams were already seated in their canoe, and they just started paddling backwards, and they all went home. The expression on their face was not one of happiness or of a win. It was one of sadness, and they came on home. But that young man ran for 2 days and 2 nights, and as he was coming down into his village, and oh my, his hair was sticking out to here, and he looked so tired and bedraggled. And an old woman who had been out there cooking for the elders that could not travel, she was stirring her pot, food, and she looked up, and gee, she was startled by his appearance. She said, what happened? And he told her the story about the Klallams coming. And as soon as their canoe had hit the beach, well, then this trembling started. And it trembled so hard that it opened up this gaping hole, and all the people that had been at that potlatch went down, and all the time he was telling the story, she was going like this, and she was stirring. Yes, yes. She'd say, And he says, old woman, he says, have you ever heard of that before? And she said, yes, I have. And she says, I want you to remember this too. She says, it's really important. She says, you remember this. And don't ever let it happen again, because you see how many people suffer. When you're going to have a big event, no matter who they are, you invite everyone. They don't have to be your dear friends. They don't have to be your relatives. But they're people with feelings too, and you have to invite them. That's the good thing to do. And so I give this to you. When you have an event, you invite them all.
Ooh.